This showdown today at the Supreme Court, where the Trump administration is trying to reverse a string of losses in a long-shot bid to basically rewrite the Constitution. You can see the outside of the court today. Some people gathered. The lawyers arguing for the Trump administration were confronted with their lower court losses. Judges have blocked Trump's now futile order that claimed he could somehow cancel the citizen protections that are in the U.S. Constitution. So, this lawyer was pressed on why, on behalf of the Trump DOJ, they would even try to go and bring this case. In other words, the Supreme Court judges were asking, why should we even take what has been this losing case as an appeal? Here is exactly how Justice Kagan crisply put it in her questioning.
You're losing a bunch of cases. Why would you ever take this case to us?
You're losing. Why take it to us? That's a Supreme Court justice today referring to how the Trump immigration appeal has been a losing case for Trump, and it is not even close. Some stories are complicated. This one is simple. This is because the Constitution already very clearly states that people born here are citizens. All persons born or naturalized in the U.S. are citizens, period. This has actually been a point of pride that the United States has defined citizenship this way, uniformly. In other words, not by religion. We're not saying you're born here and you're a citizen unless you believe in this or that. No. You're born here, you're a citizen. The language is clear, so it's not even close when it comes to what lawyers call interpretation, because sometimes there are valid disagreements within the branches of government about what something means. Sometimes it's Congress versus the White House, or how an agency, which is part of the White House oversight system of the executive branch, how do they interpret a bill versus the lawmakers who wrote the bill? But this isn't that. Everyone knows the Constitution beats a president's executive order. And that's not a new or partisan point. If that were not the case, every president could theoretically cancel the parts of the Constitution that they don't like with a pen. So it's not even close that the Constitution's definition of citizenship beats a president trying to disagree with it. And by the way, that's not ideological. If you imagined a very liberal president who wanted to rewrite the Constitution to allow perhaps easier or more citizenship, they couldn't do it by executive order. And so it is with the reverse. Donald Trump trying, whether it's a matter of messaging or law, trying to cancel out and narrow citizenship in the Constitution with executive order isn't allowed. Not even close. That's the baseline for Justice Kagan's questioning today, which was so grounded in objective, kind of non-debatable legal history that one of her colleagues, Trump appointee Neil Gorsuch, said admiringly, basically as a positive from the bench, that Kagan asked better questions than he could have. So here is more of her exchange today with the Trump DOJ lawyer.
You're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us? In a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning, it's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening out there, right? Every court has ruled against you.
Every court's ruled against you. You're clearly losing. Why even take it to the Supreme Court for what she is implying? We don't have a ruling yet, but will be a very clear, more prominent total loss. It's clearly a long shot bid from the Trump administration. That's why the order's already been blocked everywhere. It is not running anything. It's powerless right now because 4 judges ruled against Trump doing what I explained is not even close, trying to rewrite the Constitution by executive order to cancel out people's rights. This is a point that the immigrants lawyer emphasized because it goes in their favor how judges have already found this Trump order blatantly unlawful. So it was all pretty much dead on arrival legally, not close as a matter of how executive orders work or how citizenship law is handled. So any honest court process would land here, not break from it. And I can report that tonight, now that we've heard the arguments, the Trump appointees seem to join the whole court's skepticism today. That's clear in the questions. It's clear from a lot of the headlines and summaries from various experts. That includes Gorsuch, as we mentioned, and other justices who noted that this Trump long-shot bid was already found to be unlawful, unconstitutional in the lower courts. So all of that is bad news for the Trump effort. Whether they have some other strategy that's been discussed to clog or overload the courts, overload the system, try to kind of make everyone feel frazzled. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at a clear loser and say there must be some other reason. Sometimes there are, other times there aren't. Other times people just make bad or incompetent legal decisions. But another thing happened here that also cut against some of the Trump efforts. Justice Barrett, a Trump appointee, took the example of today's oral arguments, where the Trump folks are on shaky ground, to also ask about Trump's DOJ suggesting the radical, lawless idea that they could sometimes ignore court precedent.
Justice Kagan asked my questions better than I could have.
These district judges are not just doing universal injunctions, they're finding these actions illegal because they're exceeding existing authority.
Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say, in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion?
Those are tough questions. They're always phrased in the sort of dry, respectful manner of the Supreme Court. And as a reminder, Trump lost big 7-2, losing the Trump appointees as well in that emergency order. But if you're not a total Supreme Court nerd, you might not keep track of how they do the hearings. That type of order, because it was on an emergency basis, didn't have one of these big oral arguments that are such a big deal and everyone goes to court and we cover it, right? And so that's relevant today because what we're seeing is some of the possibly pent up negative questions and arguments from the Supreme Court to the Trump team that didn't have a real avenue there. I mean, they did rule against him 7-2 and said they got to facilitate the return of that detainee. And I'll mention a bit more about that in a second. But big picture, this is the chance for these justices to ask these questions. And they clearly have on their mind not only what is this, quote, losing executive order case, as they've been discussing, but the wider thing that's going on here. So let me turn to that right now with you. Put it very simple. In a healthy, valid constitutional democracy, politicians do not try to break the law. They don't tend to publicly flout schemes to do that or ignore some court orders. And while America has a very up and down history on a lot of issues, most of the time in the modern era, that hasn't happened. You'd have to go back to Richard Nixon to find a president who blatantly talked about it. And remember, he ultimately left office under a cloud for it.
Of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. It was written very precisely and consciously by a group of lawmakers as the first of their Reconstruction-era constitutional reforms after banning slavery, an effort to refound the nation on the principles of true multiracial democracy. Today, Trump and his lawyers took a stab at undoing that. Some justices were not having it.
You're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here. You know, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us? In a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal. They're winning. It's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening out there, right? Every court has ruled against you.
She's not wrong. Justice Elena Kagan was referring to Trump's Inauguration Day executive order, which essentially seeks to deny citizenship to anyone born in the U.S. to parents who aren't already citizens or permanent residents. Now, enforcement of that order has been halted by the federal courts in at least 4 separate lawsuits against the Trump administration because it's so blatantly unconstitutional, anti-constitutional even. And so they appealed to the Supreme Court, and it's easy to see why, right? Here's the math. Trump thinks the justices are made men and made women, that they're his people, at least the 3 he personally appointed, the 3 other conservatives he inherited. And I think his takeaway from another Supreme Court case last year, the one that granted him broad immunity for crimes he committed in official acts as president, was that if you have a solid majority of justices in the high court, you can amend the Constitution You can add a new immunity provision or just delete birthright citizenship simply by going to the court and basically rewriting the document. It's that easy. Get 5 votes, and the U.S. Constitution can say whatever you want it to say. But today in oral arguments, Trump's lawyers did not ask the justices to rule on the merits of their bizarre fringe order ending birthright citizenship. Instead, what they're arguing today that none of the federal judges, these are the lowest level judges, district court judges, who halted the order had the power to issue nationwide injunctions. They said the judge's relief should only apply to the plaintiffs, the individual parties who sued the administration. And some of the justices, including one of the conservatives, Amy Coney Barrett, seem to say, whoa, not so fast. That makes no sense.
Look, there are all kinds of abuses of nationwide injunctions. But I think that the question that this case presents is that if one thinks that it's quite clear that the EO is illegal, how does one get to that result, in what time frame, on your set of rules, without the possibility of a nationwide injunction?
On this case and on many similar cases, the appropriate way to do it is for there to be multiple lower courts considering it, the appropriate percolation that goes to the lower courts, and then ultimately this court decides the merits in a nationwide binding precedent. You have a complete inversion of that through the nationwide injunctions where the district
So, General
courts...
Sauer, are you really going to answer Justice Kagan by saying there's no way to do this expeditiously?
Notice the Trump lawyers, they like when things percolate. Yeah, they like when things take a little while when they're not in a hurry. When they're in a hurry, they want it to go fast. Now, suddenly, the Trump White House was compounding one gross abuse of power, ending birthright citizenship, with another one, arguing that even if a federal court rules their executive order unconstitutional, the administration can keep carrying it out against anyone who wasn't expressly named as a plaintiff in that ruling, which is a dodge. And they're only saying that because they keep getting shredded by lower courts. So today, it fell to the court's liberals to call out just how unequal and unjust that dodge was.
Your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive.
So, folks, when you're talking about judges and their career, you're not just talking about their formal employment. You're talking about their impact and their legacy. People like this are also about legacy. And what you're seeing is that Clarence Thomas's career has been utterly shambolic and has been pointed out to be sycophantic, and we're seeing it here. And this is not me defending the other right-wing judges. I'm not. But you can see the difference between a right-wing judge that is, yes, evil. I really do think if you voted to take away Roe v. Wade, that is an evil decision. I really do feel that on their deathbed, they will still have to face judgment for that. But there's a difference even between those people, Barrett, Kavanaugh, whatever, and Clarence Thomas. You could see it. So many 8172s have Thomas on the wrong end. And he often asks questions not to actually participate as a judge, but to push right-wing propaganda. He is no more a judge than I am, and than you are. And you could see it today. Look at the other conservatives and how their questions were real questions. And when Trump's lawyers got asked real questions, my goodness, they did not have real answers. Let's just put it that way. The biggest exposer of people like Clarence Thomas has been the fact that, ironic as it is, the 3 Trump judges, the ones that he picked, are less insane than him and won't be seen as evil as he was.